They came at 3:00 a.m., pretending to be HOA officers, but their mission wasn't inspection. It was invasion. Their uniforms, their badges, even their tone, all part of a carefully crafted lie meant to turn trust into fear. But they picked the wrong house, because inside was James Carter, a Navy SEAL veteran who didn't wait for permission to protect his home. Now hear how one man's instinct stopped a rising threat, exposed the truth, and brought justice crashing down in the most unexpected way. On paper, the Carter family lived the American dream. Their house sat in a neat cul-de-sac just outside of Austin, Texas, a neighborhood filled with trimmed hedges, double-car garages, and neighbors who waved while walking their golden retrievers. It was the kind of place where people left bikes in front yards overnight and only locked their doors out of habit. But James Carter didn't trust appearances. A retired Navy SEAL with 22 years of active duty, James had seen too much of the world to ever relax completely. He might have traded body armor for polos and lawn chairs, but old habits didn't retire with him. He still checked every lock twice, still sat facing the entrance in restaurants, still kept a flashlight and a tactical pen within arm's reach. He didn't talk about what he'd done overseas, not to the neighbors, not even to his son, but he carried it with him, not like a burden, more like a second skin. His 17-year-old son, Noah, often teased him, "Come on, Dad, this isn't a war zone." He'd laugh, pointing to their backyard garden or the hummingbird feeder. James would just give him that small, quiet look, the one that said, "It only has to feel like one once." On the night of March 14th, everything seemed ordinary. The sprinklers had clicked on at exactly 2:00 a.m. The neighborhood, still and warm, was wrapped in its usual blanket of silence. Noah had fallen asleep with his earbuds in, half watching some late-night video. James, as always, was only partly asleep. He lay in bed, eyes closed but alert, the kind of rest soldiers learn to master, just enough to recover, never deep enough to miss the sound of trouble. At 3:03 a.m., his eyes opened. It wasn't a crash. It wasn't shouting. It was something quieter, more deliberate, a metallic clink, like a latch being tampered with, followed by low voices, not panicked, calm, coordinated, almost rehearsed. Then nothing, a stretch of perfect, heavy silence. James slipped out of bed without a word. No panic, no noise, just a practiced precision, as if his body moved before his brain had finished processing what he'd heard. He walked past the family photos in the hallway, past the guest room, and paused briefly at Noah's closed door. The boy was sleeping soundly. James didn't wake him. Instead, he opened the hallway cabinet and reached for the item he hoped he'd never need again, a locked, padded case. Inside it, a tool, not for intimidation, but for control, a measure of last resort for moments when reason disappears. He moved toward the front of the house, lights off, steps slow, breathing steady. Outside, on the other side of the front door, two shadows stood just out of reach of the porch light. One of them raised something, maybe a clipboard, maybe not. Then came a voice, firm, official sounding, "Open up, HOA compliance check, mandatory inspection." James didn't answer. He didn't move. He just waited, because something wasn't right. This wasn't procedure. This wasn't normal. And James Carter had survived too much to mistake calm words for good intentions. "Open up, HOA compliance unit." The shout rang through the door like a judge's gavel, sharp and out of place in the stillness of the night. The pounding that followed was heavy, deliberate, not a polite knock, but a demand for obedience. Noah's eyes flew open. At first he couldn't tell if he was dreaming or if the sound had come from inside his headphones, but then he heard it again, another thud, louder this time. He sat up, heart racing, mind foggy with confusion. James was already moving. He'd opened the hallway safe with the same efficiency he'd once used to clear buildings overseas. No hesitation, no wasted motion. Inside was the Benelli 4, a smooth, reliable tool built for clarity and chaos. The peephole offered a narrow slice of the front porch. Two figures stood under the motion-activated light, dressed in matching black vests with reflective letters, HOA enforcement. It was meant to look official, clean fonts, tactical gear, badges hanging from lanyards. But James saw what most wouldn't: the inconsistencies, the positioning of the patches, the lack of agency insignia, the way one of the men kept shifting from foot to foot. glancing at the driveway like he was checking for something or someone. James's grip tightened. His instincts, fine-tuned from years in volatile places, whispered the truth before logic caught up. These men were not who they claimed to be. He turned silently toward the kitchen, where Noah now stood, barefoot in the hallway, pale and wide-eyed. James raised a single finger to his lips, then pointed toward the pantry. Noah obeyed without a word. Back at the door, James took position just out of the line of sight. He kept the shotgun angled low, not out of uncertainty, but control. He listened. The voices returned. They're stalling. Just breach it. 3 seconds, then we go. 1, 2. The lock splintered. The door swung open fast, not kicked, but forced with practiced pressure. The first man stepped inside, scanning the room as if expecting to find frightened residents and no resistance. He didn't expect James. In a single, smooth motion, James raised the shotgun and gave a loud, firm command, not another step. But the man reached, whether for a tool or something else. James couldn't risk waiting to find out. The sound that followed was sudden and final, not drawn out, not chaotic. One precise report that echoed through the walls like a warning to the second man still outside. He bolted. James didn't pursue. He secured the area, keeping his eyes on the hallway, listening for any movement. The house, once filled with quiet tension, now rang with the sharp beat of adrenaline. Noah peeked from the pantry door, his voice just above a whisper. "Dad, what just happened?" James exhaled slowly, checking the chamber and lowering the weapon. "Stay there. Call the police." His voice was calm, steady not because he wasn't afraid, but because fear couldn't lead. Not now. Through the open door, the porch light flickered in the wind. The illusion of safety had been shattered, but not the resolve of the man standing in its place. The blast had knocked the first intruder off his feet. He crumpled near the doorway with a thud that sent a tremor through the floorboards. Later, they'd learn his name was Derek Reed, early 30s, no priors, but a long digital trail of bad intentions. The second man, Mark Jensen, had chosen flight over fight. He stumbled backward, lost his footing in the flower bed James's wife had planted last spring, and disappeared into the dark, crashing through the side gate like a startled animal. But James didn't follow. He wasn't thinking about glory or revenge or what the man might do next. He was thinking about angles, about exposure, about his son. The front door stood wide open, the cool night air washing in like a warning. James stepped forward, nudged it shut with one hand, and twisted the lock, then the second, then slid the deadbolt into place mechanically, deliberately, like sealing off a breach. He turned and moved through the house with the same methodical rhythm, checking windows, sight lines, listening for anything out of place. It was quiet now, too quiet for what had just happened. When he found Noah in the hallway, the boy was standing perfectly still. His arms hung by his sides, his face pale. The pantry door was still half open behind him. James didn't speak. He just looked at him, really looked to make sure there was no harm, no bruises, no blood, only the wide, stunned eyes of someone who had just come face to face with a truth they weren't ready for. Noah was shaking, not violently, just enough that you could see it in his fingers. "I didn't know what to do," he whispered. "You did exactly what you needed to," James said calmly. "You stayed quiet. You stayed safe." His voice was level, as always, but something in it trembled underneath, not from fear, but the weight of what had nearly been. He walked past Noah toward the kitchen phone, the one wired into the wall, the one that didn't rely on batteries or signals or chance. He dialed 911 with steady fingers and reported the incident with the precision of a man giving a field update. 2 armed intruders, 1 incapacitated, 1 fled, 1 occupant armed, shots fired, no injuries among residents. Address is... He gave it all in under 20 seconds. When he hung up, he leaned on the counter for just a moment, just long enough to feel the reality catch up to him. Then he turned back toward his son. Noah hadn't moved. He was still staring, not at the door or the hallway or even the body outside. He was staring at his father, James Carter, the man who grilled burgers on Sundays, who fixed the leaky faucet, who always made sure the tires were rotated on time, the man who seemed, most days, like any other dad in the neighborhood. But in that moment, Noah saw something else, not a father, not a neighbor, not even a man. He saw a presence, a force trained to respond when others freeze, a protector who had come out of retirement in the space of a single breath. It was terrifying, and it was safe. For the first time in his life, Noah truly understood the distance between the man his father chose to be and the man he had once been trained to become. And tonight, that man had saved their lives. The flashing red and blue lights lit up the entire block within minutes. Sirens broke the fragile silence that had followed the encounter. By the time the first cruiser skidded to a stop at the curb, James had already disarmed, unloaded his weapon, and placed it on the kitchen counter. It was visible, unthreatening, part of the scene now. Still, the moment officers entered the house, everything moved fast and loud. Hands where we can see them. Step back from the weapon. Get on your knees now. Noah watched from the hallway, frozen again, but this time not by fear of criminals, but by something colder, more impersonal. They treated James like a suspect, as if he were the threat. He didn't argue, didn't flinch, just slowly raised his hands, voice steady. I'm the homeowner. The intruders are outside. One is wounded. The other ran. Check their IDs. Check their truck. You'll see what they came here to do. But no one was listening yet. Protocol ruled the moment. One officer secured the scene. Another read rights. Metal cuffs clicked into place. James didn't resist. He simply looked Noah in the eye as he was led out the front door and nodded once. It was enough to keep the boy grounded. Outside, the situation began to shift. As the perimeter was searched, officers found the second man's truck, parked a few houses down, hidden halfway behind a tree. Inside, they discovered a large black duffel bag, no clothes, no personal items, just equipment, a flashlight, two-way radios, rolls of tape, pre-printed HOA-style warning slips, a binder of false documentation inspection forms, fake fines, even signatures forged from real board members, and beneath all that, zip ties and gloves. It wasn't a work kit. It was a plan. A few feet away, Derek Reed was sitting against the curb, wounded but conscious, under close supervision. He didn't say a word, just stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Mark Jensen, the one who had fled, didn't make it far. A K9 unit found him 2 blocks over, hiding behind a restaurant dumpster. He was cold, disoriented, and visibly shaken, with a few light scrapes on his face. His hands were still gloved. He offered no resistance. Back at the Carter house, things finally began to slow. One of the senior officers reviewed the preliminary findings and called for the cuffs to be removed. Another apologized to James not effusively, just enough to acknowledge what had begun as a mistake. James nodded once, no resentment, no outrage. He understood. This was how the system worked. It reacted to circumstances, not stories. It couldn't afford to assume someone was a protector, not until the facts aligned. James wasn't angry, but Noah was. He watched the way his father stood in the driveway, not humiliated, not defeated, just distant, as if he was already mentally writing a report, already back in a world where people didn't ask questions first. They cleared rooms and debriefed later. To the neighbors who had gathered, it was a strange, surreal moment. But for James Carter, it was just another perimeter, another gray area where doing the right thing meant waiting to be proven right. And in the eyes of his son, it was both heartbreaking and awe-inspiring, because Noah had just learned something systems couldn't teach. Courage doesn't wait for permission. It acts, then takes the consequences head-on. Over the next 24 hours, the illusion shattered, piece by piece. It started with a phone call from a detective to James, now officially cleared of suspicion. Then came the reports, the database matches, the grainy security footage from neighboring counties. Mark Jensen and Derek Reed weren't just pretending. They had built an operation methodical, convincing, and increasingly bold. For weeks, they had posed as HOA compliance officers, complete with badges, clipboards, and branded vests. Their script was simple: show up late in the evening, under the pretense of enforcing minor violations, overgrown grass, garbage bins left out, broken fences, just enough authority to sound plausible, just enough fear to keep homeowners compliant. And it worked. Using this routine, they had talked their way past front doors. Sometimes they asked to inspect the backyard. Other times, they demanded access to verify fencing boundaries. They moved quickly, grabbed what they could: electronics, jewelry, documents, always targeting houses that looked well off, quiet, unsuspecting. In 2 cases, according to police reports, residents had been forced to remain in a room while the duo ransacked the property. The tools found in their vehicle, gloves, tape, zip ties, weren't accidental. They had done this before, more than once. The most disturbing part came from Arizona. 2 months earlier, a similar pair, fitting their exact description, had entered a home under the guise of community enforcement. The homeowner, an older man with heart issues, panicked during the confrontation and collapsed. He was later pronounced dead at the scene. The suspects had fled. No arrests were ever made in that case until now. James's instincts hadn't just protected his family. He had stopped a pattern, one that was escalating. When local law enforcement confirmed the link, the story broke. News vans lined the end of the street by noon. Neighbors watched from their porches as reporters gave live updates in front of the Carter home. Headlines ran across Texas. Veteran foils home invasion, disguised as HOA inspection, fake officials, real danger, retired SEAL stops criminal duo. Talk radio lit up with calls praising James's courage. On social media, he was dubbed everything from the last line of defense to the HOA they should fear. But James didn't read the articles. He didn't care about likes, shares, or airtime. He stood on the back deck that evening, staring out into the yard. The fence was still broken where Mark had run through it. The flower bed was trampled. His shotgun rested inside, cleaned and locked away again. For him, the headlines weren't the victory. The victory was that Noah was safe, that his home still stood, that evil had knocked and been turned away. The rest was just noise. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. It wasn't the peaceful hum of appliances and distant sprinklers. It was a kind of stillness that settled in after the storm, heavy and waiting, like the walls were listening now, like they remembered. Noah sat at the kitchen table, staring at an open textbook he wasn't reading. The pages might as well have been blank. He tried to focus, to be normal, but the scenes kept playing on repeat. The pounding at the door, the command, the sound, his father's face. That face haunted him the most, not angry, not panicked, just focused, locked in, cold, in a way Noah had never seen. He wasn't sure if it scared him more than the men who broke in. James hadn't spoken much since the incident. He wasn't one for long conversations to begin with, but now, even his silences felt heavier, more calculated. He moved through the house like someone measuring every step, every line of sight, every vulnerability. One night, when they were both in the kitchen, Noah fidgeting with his glass of water, James checking the locks again, the boy finally spoke. "I still hear it," he said quietly. James didn't ask what. He already knew. "You don't wait for evil to knock politely," James replied. "You stop it at the threshold." There was no bravado in his voice, no pride. It was a simple truth, said by a man who had learned it the hard way and carried it like armor. Noah nodded, but it didn't bring the comfort he thought it would, because knowing they were safe didn't erase how close they came to not being. And suddenly, the world outside, the one with mailboxes and trimmed lawns, felt less like a neighborhood and more like a place where things could go wrong at any moment. Even stepping outside felt different now. He used to wave to the neighbors. Now he watched them longer, tried to read more into their faces, listened to the way people walked down the sidewalk. He noticed cars more, watched the patterns of headlights. James noticed too. He didn't just check the doors anymore. He stood by the window longer, silent, observing, not paranoid, just vigilant. Like the threat wasn't gone. Like he didn't believe it ever would be. He was watching the street, yes, but mostly he was watching people. And Noah, he was watching him. It was strange, realizing the man who grilled on weekends and fixed the garage door was also the man who could end a threat in seconds. The contrast made everything else feel thinner. The walls, the locks, the daylight. The home had survived the break-in, but now it had to survive the weight of what came after. And that, Noah was learning, might be even harder. James wasn't charged. The decision came after days of review, interviews, forensics, and quiet debates behind polished conference tables. The district attorney's office took their time carefully, deliberately, not because they doubted the threat, but because situations like this always raised questions, legal ones, ethical ones, public ones. Was the use of force justified? Was it too fast, too final? In the end, Texas law spoke clearly. The state's castle doctrine allowed homeowners to defend themselves and their families with no obligation to retreat when faced with an immediate threat, especially one that broke down their door in the middle of the night. James had done exactly what the law allowed, but legality and peace of mind were two very different things. Back at home, James didn't celebrate. He didn't mention the ruling. He simply returned to his routines, cutting the lawn, tightening the porch light, checking the security cameras twice a day. To the outside world, it might have seemed like he had moved on, but Noah saw it differently. There was a new kind of quiet around his father now, not silence. James had always been a man of few words. This was something else, a stillness, as if he were carrying something invisible that didn't quite let go. One evening after dinner, they sat on the back porch. The sun was dipping low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the grass. James held his coffee like he always did, both hands, steady grip, even when it was nearly empty. Noah hesitated before asking, "Do you think it'll ever feel normal again?" James looked out across the yard for a moment before answering. "No," he said, "but normal is not the point." He paused, then turned slightly, his voice quiet but clear. "I didn't want to shoot, but I had to, and I'd do it again." There was no pride in the words, no regret either, just truth, simple, weighty, unmoved by emotion. James had done harder things in war zones, more dangerous, more chaotic, but those were missions. This was different. This was his own front yard, his own floorboards, his son sleeping down the hall. He wasn't haunted by what he did. He was haunted by how close it came to not being enough. For Noah, hearing those words settled something, not because they answered all his questions, but because they showed that even men trained to act without hesitation still carry the cost of their choices. And in that moment, he realized something important. Being right didn't always feel good, but sometimes it was the only thing that kept you alive. Weeks passed. The house still looked the same from the outside, same siding, same porch swing, same garden bed that had started to bloom again. But inside the neighborhood, something unspoken had shifted. Security cameras appeared almost overnight, not just at the Carter house, but all along the block. Doorbell systems, motion sensors, dusk to dawn floodlights. Where once there had been trust, now there was surveillance. Neighbors waved less, or if they did, it was brief, a nod, a glance, a quick word before retreating indoors. The tone of casual conversation had disappeared. Block parties were quietly cancelled. The next HOA meeting didn't happen, and no one asked why. James walked the same sidewalk he always had, but now with a different kind of space around him. People moved slightly aside, unsure whether what they felt was respect or fear. Maybe both. He wasn't just a neighbor anymore. He was a reminder. Noah noticed it most, not just the neighborhood, but his dad. Before, James had always been steady, quiet, dependable, the man who changed oil himself and reminded Noah to mow in straight lines. A veteran, yes, but in the way people said it, with a past tense comfort. Now, Noah saw him differently, not as a soldier, but as a shield. He realized something he hadn't known to look for before, that the calm in their home had always had a cost, that peace had a protector, and while the world hadn't changed, his understanding of it had. It wasn't just the break-in that did it. It was what came after, the way James sat facing the door now, the way he scanned the street before locking up at night, the way he never seemed surprised by anything anymore, only prepared. One afternoon, James invited him out to the range. Noah didn't know what to expect. Part of him thought it might be some kind of training drills, tactics, a father turning a son into a version of himself. But it wasn't like that. James showed him how to breathe first, how to stand, how to wait, how to be still. There were no lectures, no war stories, just quiet repetitions and short corrections. It wasn't about weapons. It was about presence. After a long silence, as they packed up to leave, James said, "You don't have to be a soldier, but you do need to know how to protect what matters." The words weren't heavy. They were offered gently, like advice passed down instead of pushed forward. And Noah understood this wasn't about preparing for a fight. It was about carrying the weight of responsibility, not in fear, but in quiet readiness, about not letting the world make you paranoid, but also not letting it catch you unaware again. As they drove home, the sun dipped behind the houses, casting long shadows across the cul-de-sac. The neighborhood was still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now, the kind that had been earned. The sentencing didn't take long. Mark Jensen and Derek Reed pleaded guilty on all counts: impersonation, forced entry, organized burglary. The evidence was overwhelming, no appeals, no second chances. Each received 20 years, no parole. The judge called it a cowardly and calculated abuse of trust. James didn't go to court. That morning, while the legal system closed the case, he sat on his front porch, coffee in hand, staring out over the same street where it had all begun. Noah joined him in silence, unsure whether this day was meant to feel like an ending or just another morning. After a while, he asked, "You okay with how it ended?" James didn't smile, but his face softened. No one wins in these things, he said. You just survive them, and make sure the people you love do too. The porch creaked beneath them as the breeze stirred the hedges. Across the street, a motion light flicked on, but this time, neither of them moved. They weren't afraid anymore. They were aware. They were watchful. They were ready.